I am Brian of London, but as you can see, I am not in London right now. I made Aliyah. 8 years ago, I moved from London to Israel. I thought maybe I'll tell a nice story, something about taking my kids to play in the snow in Neve Daniel, along with my mother-in-law, who'd managed to live her entire life in Israel, born of Israeli parents, and never actually managed to go to Gush Etzion. She hadn't left that Tel Aviv bubble and crossed over that magical green line that everyone has gone on about for no reason that we can readily remember. But I did take my kids to play in the snow. It was a lot easier than driving up to the Golan because all the other traffic went to the Golan. Nobody was going to Neve Daniel. We were there in an hour. It's very easy. Played in the snow, put the kids back in the car, drove home. Easy, not without the 6 hours traffic. But that makes me think, why do we have misconceptions about Israel, even amongst Israelis? I can understand the international world. But I'll go back now, over 8 years ago, to why I left Britain. I grew up there. It was my home. I was comfortable there. But things started happening that I started to feel uncomfortable around the people who I'd grown up with. One day, this is probably in about 2005, 2006, I made a conscious decision to show some of my British, non-Jewish friends a film that had been made by Professor Landis. Professor Landis made a film about Mohammed al-Jura. Now, you might remember that name. Mohammed al-Jura was a little kid who, allegedly, was shot and killed. And this happened in September 2000. And it's one of the landmark events of the what I will call the second Arab jihad revolt of modern times. I won't use another word. And that second Arab revolt of modern times, this image of a little child crouching down behind a barrel in the arms of his father and supposedly being shot by Israeli troops, that image went out on the news. It went out on the news first in France and then across basically the entire world. It eventually made its way onto a postage stamp. It's an image many parts of this country and in fact the whole Arab and even Muslim world. And it was even cited by Osama bin Laden in his 9/11 explanation video. The death of one child, one. Why was it so important and how did it get amplified? And I showed this video that my friend had made explaining that they had been filming for 2 days, and out of the 2 days of filming, all sorts of staged events, people being bundled into ambulances and shots coming from all sorts of directions. After 2 days, they'd come up with this footage of this one child. And it had been filmed by Palestinian cameramen, and it had been passed on to something called Agence France Presse, AFP. Who is AFP? AFP is one of the big three, I would say, big three television news and not just television, but news consolidating agencies. So now I'll move on to the real center of the story. And I'm going to jump back even 2 years, 2003, the very start of the Gulf War. I was a management consultant in London. That was my career. And I wound up doing a project for something called Associated Press Television News. You've all heard of AP, Associated Press. APTN is the television part, and they do pretty much the same job. And what is the job of a newswire? Now, people inside the media sort of know this, but I don't think the vast majority of people understand how their news is made. How's the sausage made? Well, what happens is this. Pictures are taken all over the world, and these pictures are uploaded. Nowadays in the digital world, this all uses the internet. Back in 2003, when I was doing it, this was tape. The tape was sent usually by satellite, fed into a building in London, in Camden Lock. And there's a huge building there, staffed round the clock. And that's Associated Press Television News. Pictures come in of everything: sports events, pop concert, press conferences, red carpets in Cannes, all of that stuff, and news, press conferences, all sorts of stuff, winds up in this building in Camden. And in Camden, it is edited. It is put together, made into 4, 5, 6-minute stories, and distributed to clients of Associated Press Television News. Who are the customers of APTN? Well, it's all of the television news: Fox News, CNN, BBC, and all the small ones, all the little stations across America. All of them subscribe to APTN. All of them pay a fee for their feed, and what that fee gets them is the right to show any of these pictures. That's a business model that's grown up over a century, less for the television news, but it's essentially the same business model that AP works on. AP's history is that it was started in the late 1800s as a club, basically, by the big newspapers on the east coast of America. They were getting their news from the west coast, and each one of them was paying someone to send a telegram, a telegraph, and that was costing them a lot of money. So they said, we'll write the story once in San Francisco or LA, and we'll send it once, and then we'll all print our version of the same story. And essentially, that club, that Associated Press Club, is what we have today. And Associated Press Television News is its television arm. Now, APTN, it operates in London as a for-profit enterprise, and the money goes back to AP. And for the whole world, they produce stories. But there's one part of the world, and I discovered this because I was actually in their offices for a 6-week period. One part of the world gets a very special service. One part of the world, instead of just getting raw footage and just written descriptions and basically the raw meat of news that you would have to then edit yourself into a story, instead of getting that, one part of the world gets finished news bulletins that they can just show on their nightly news. That one part of the world, and the only one, is the Arab Middle East. So they have an entire room working in London, all speaking Arabic, all producing Arabic news all the time. And especially in that very weird period when I was there in 2003, what was on the screens was the outbreak of this Gulf War. What was on the screens was the Palestinians here protesting. It was Israeli crackdowns on Palestinians protesting. It was all of the pictures that you are familiar with, because they were good, they were strong, they were video that tore at the heartstrings. And that room full of Arabic journalists was as big as the room that did the television for the entire world. So think of this. In London, you have 2 rooms, one for the whole world, one just for the Middle East. And the Middle East room is producing stuff tailored to the tastes and the needs of the rulers of the Arab world. And what do they want to show their people? They want to show their people poor, oppressed Palestinians, because it's one of their methods of control. One of their methods of control is, however bad you think you've got it in this emirate, it's far worse under the Jews. That's what they showed. And what I discovered was that as jobs came up in one room or the other, there was total cross-population. So the room full of Arabic speakers doing the Arab news would send people across to the room doing the news for the entire world. And I couldn't really believe what I'd seen. And it took me some years, I guess, to process what I believe this was. What it means is that pro-Israel stuff. You want to film pro-Israel stuff back in that day? You'd never get it through. It would be dropped either at the bureaus at this end, and if it did make it through a bureau in Jerusalem, it would get dropped on the floor in Camden. It just wouldn't get out. There was a massive filtering of what was permissible to say that went to the entire world. And remember, APTN, you've never heard of it because you watch Fox, you watch CNN, you watch the BBC, you watch Sky. All of these are getting their pictures from APTN and Reuters, which I don't have personal experience at Reuters, but all of them get this filtered news. And this shocked me to the core because I understood back then, and this was pre-YouTube, remember, I understood this was not, there was no way that this was going to allow us to get a fair hearing about Israel. How did this come to pass? Now, you can say that it was accidental, and I, for some time, thought that perhaps this was accidental. But I came to know a woman called Batya Or, and Batya Or had written a book in 2002 called Islam and Dimitude. And I felt that there was something in there that really struck a chord with me, knowing what I knew about APTN. What Batya Or had done in that book is she'd looked through the proceedings of something called the Conference in Support of Arab Peoples, which was something that the Arabs had been holding since pretty much straight after their massive defeat in 1967. And each year they would get together and have this big club, and they would minute it, and they would print the minutes in Arabic, and I think sometimes even in English translation, but nobody would read them. And one of the things that they resolved to do every year, and I'll read from her book, she said, successive Arab conferences resolved to contribute vast sums to universities, centers for Islamic studies, international communications agencies, and private and governmental organizations in order to win over world opinion. And what did I know from APTN? I knew that APTN's profitability was massively, massively skewed towards this Arab service. The Arab countries paid a vast amount more for their full-featured service than even the BBC or CNN were paying for their service, which made the Middle East part much more profitable. If that was set up by accident, well, it was a very, very, very fortuitous accident if you wanted to corrupt news at its very source. So I showed a video to my friends in England. I showed a video of this Mohammed El Jura and how it was created and how the raw footage got turned into a highly emotive piece of film that literally changed the world, and how it got spread by news agencies in a way that has affected our world, our entire world, and not just Israel, forever. And my best friend at the time, and I really have little contact since then, said to me, if they're this good, and by them he meant the people producing the video, if they're this good, you're effed. And that was when I started to think I didn't want to live in the UK anymore. I wanted to come here, be with my people, in the indigenous land of the Jews, a land where we talk about having all the marks of indigenousness, blood, culture, language, land, and spirituality. We have all of that here. And somehow, since 1967, the narrative has been inverted, and we've allowed that, and somehow we're the colonial invaders and not the Arab conquest. But I can see in my head how that got inverted. It was deliberate. It happened on our watch. And the only note of hope that I will end on is that what has changed now is I can look directly into a camera, and this video will go onto YouTube, and it will get spread, and people will learn what I'm saying without CNN, without Fox, without BBC, without Reuters, without APTN, and without Agence France Presse. And we can do that now because we've got the internet. And that's why we can win. Just as we will win against the Palestinians because they're fighting us they're fighting as if we're colonial invaders, and we're not, and their tactics will lose. We're home, we're indigenous, and we'll win both on the ground and on the internet. Thanks very much for having me.